Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Welcome to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. I will be joined here in a second by a special guest. Definitely a very odd day, a show that I never thought that I would have to do, but the reports out there are saying Big Ten football will not play in 2020, between a report on the Dan Patrick show, radio show earlier this morning, and then followed up by a printed story by the Detroit Free Press. It sounds like the plug has been pulled. Much sadness in Whoville, but we just have to kind of move on at this point. We're gonna talk a little bit more about this. There's a lot going on here. Let me bring in one of our great interns. I want to welcome Jacob to the show. Jacob, sorry that your debut run here on BIA is on such a solemn occasion.
Hey, Kevin, I appreciate you having me on and interning over at Buckeye Grove. It's certainly been an interesting weekend, and it starts the morning here on Monday. Certainly hasn't been the best.
Well, just moving forward on this show, just for the sake of everything, I want to make sure everybody knows at the time that we're recording this podcast, nothing official has come out of the league office. Multiple reports are saying that this is done. The Big Ten is pulling the plug. Seems to be the first Power 5 conference to be doing this, unless the Pac-12 somehow gets in under the wire. Didn't think it would get to this point. I really didn't. And this has nothing to do with any of the tied-in politics of coronavirus or anything like that. But you sit there and you have a conference that puts out a schedule. The Big Ten was the first league to come out and say, we're going to do league only. We know what we know. We know that it's safe to play other Big Ten schools, or it's safer to play other Big Ten schools. We know their locker rooms. We know the hotels. We know what we're doing. We're gonna call the non-conference schedule. Then the last league to put out a schedule, and that schedule, the ink is barely dry on it, and now they're pulling the plug. It's ridiculous.
It is very soon, they had all these things established, like it was looking like they were going to go forward with something, and then, in a span of a few days, things are reportedly looking a little bit different.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The Big Ten decides that, on this schedule, which you may as well frame as a collector's item, says, we're going to start on September 5th, but we're going to have these weeks built in, and we've done all these smart things to be able to have room on the schedule in case of, outbreaks and whatnot and so on and so forth. Does the league look to push it back to the 12th or the 19th or the 26th? Hell, October. No, they just pull the plug.
Yep, they went forward with it, and it looked like, gave some excitement, some hope that there were some contingency plans, some, faith in the already established protocols. The players even came out in support of what Ohio State has been doing. So it looked like they were going to go forward with it from September 3rd, September 5th, but the reports here that they aren't even pushing it back a week, 2 weeks, as you said, it's not really a good look.
And you sit there and you put these players through all of these hoops. We got to do this. We've got to do that. We've got a great plan in place. Yes, the Big Ten did see its fair share of players opt out for one reason or another. And that is an individual decision that every player had to make with themselves and with their families and everything else. I don't think at any point anybody was forcing anybody to go out there and and play or not play or whatever. And now everybody's hand is forced in the Big Ten. And the truth of the matter is, where we stand right now, the ACC and the SEC and the Big 12, all, they haven't come out and issued statements and say that they're still moving forward. The Pac-12 seems to be on this same path, and I don't think anybody's really surprised by that. But these other three conferences are, talking about, that they still could go on. I mean, that certainly is a look.
Right. It sure is interesting because now one big domino has fallen in the Big Ten, reportedly. And so you got to wonder, I haven't seen if these conferences, the other bigger conferences, are having these emergency meetings like the Big Ten has had. But certainly you probably will see on Twitter or through the, the rumor mill that those are going to be held. So more news could be to come.
And last night, on Sunday night, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and several other major players out in college football came out with a hashtag "We Want to Play," where you saw this Pac-12 organizing group come together, and then this Big Ten organizing group come together, and then it all kind of merged into one. It's obvious that while you may have 100, 150 opt-outs already in within the Power Five, don't quote me on that number. The vast majority of these guys wanted to play, and will at least within the Big Ten at this point, with where we stand, if you believe the reports to be true, are not going to get an opportunity.
Right, and even in addition to the players, the parents came out with a letter in support of what Ohio State and their medical staff have been doing, pushing for a season to go forward. And, the players have been saying too much work has been put in for something to go down, down the waste like this. And so with these reports now, I'm interested to see their reaction to all of this stuff.
This has got a very different feeling than when college basketball and we lost the spring sports, when that all went down. And I happened to be in Indianapolis. I got out there on day one of the Big Ten tournament because I always like to be in place at these types of events, and checked into my hotel and not running around or whatever. So I was there when that went down. And obviously there were a lot of upset people. There was a lot of sadness. There was a lot of anger. But everything that had gone down was still fresh at that moment. It was still fresh because of the uncertainty of what the world was dealing with. We were still really on the front end of 2 weeks to flatten the curve and whatnot. But now, fast forward months and months and months in advance, and all of these organizations, all of these conferences, everybody has had ample opportunity to sit there and have plans in place. And honestly, it has been a willy-nilly, weak-kneed, piss-poor attempt at trying to manage a situation. And I'm going to get more and more upset as I talk about this, because honestly, I have no confidence whatsoever in any of the power structure out there right now.
That's all true. I remember back in March, March 30th was the day to come back to campus after that extended spring break, after the Big Ten tournament got canceled, when we were all assuming that 2 weeks, this was going to pass. But here we are in August, 5 months down the road, and there's been a lot of smoke screens, closed doors. It doesn't really seem like all the information has gotten out. And then with these reports getting out here and the backlash from the players, it's all, way up in the air, just no organization.
I'm going to calm down for a second. We're going to hear from one of our great sponsors here, and, a lot more coming on the flip side here on the BIA podcast. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I can't say that 30-second break calmed me down any at this point. We're recording this within minutes of the news coming out about the reports with the Big Ten shuttering the 2020 season and so on and so forth. But, now comes the issue of what happens with the rest of the leagues out there. And what happens at this point, we already knew as we saw Group of 5 conferences shutting down and FCS schools shutting down. We already saw the poaching starting to happen, that, people were getting around kids that, were not going to get an opportunity to play this year and maybe in their final year of eligibility. It brings the question now, if Ohio State isn't able to act as an independent agent, and we'll get on that one in a second, able to act as an independent agent, you could sit there and see guys like Justin Fields and Shaun Wade and some of these seniors either just focus for the year on getting better on their own and whatnot and be able to sign with agents and just, declare for the 2021 draft. Or if you have other conferences still playing, why would the NC2A not allow these guys to have immediate access in terms of an immediate waiver to transfer somewhere else where they're playing at this point? I mean, if we sit there and we see a school that goes through NC2A sanctions and has things shut down, the door is open for anybody to walk out. I mean, could you imagine Justin Fields going back to UGA? Could you imagine, Shaun Wade playing for University of Florida? And that has nothing to do with loyalties, because honestly, the Big Ten has nullified a lot of those loyalties with these garbage decisions.
That all makes sense. It's an interesting situation there. Now the ball is in the NCAA's hands where, these players are going to look to transfer. It makes sense for them to go and seek opportunities to go play if other conferences are going to be having their schedules that they have already put out and go forward with it.
Now, I kind of talked about what could happen. What could happen in terms of Ohio State? Honestly, we really don't know where Ohio State's collective mind is at. According to a report on the Dan Patrick Show this morning, Ohio State was one of the 12 schools to vote to shelve the season. Now, we don't know that to be a fact. I've always respected the work of Dan Patrick and everything there, and I don't want to come out and say I'm immediately skeptical. But Ohio State also is in a very odd position in terms of it doesn't even have a sitting president here in Columbus on a full-time basis yet. Dr. Christina Johnson, the new president who's replacing Michael Drake, still hasn't started full-time here yet. She is still in that transition period from SUNY Albany coming to Ohio State. I really just am skeptical that she, if there was such overwhelming support for this season to be shut down, it would have probably been easier for her to vote present or I don't know. I mean, because she immediately comes into a position usurping Karen Holbrook as one of the least liked university presidents in history. And so I don't understand where that comes from. But the point that I want to get to is what happens if, according to the Dan Patrick report, I really should just play the Dan Patrick report, but I don't have it handy at the moment. The SEC seems to really be the ringleader of trying to hold the line and keep this going. Whereas, reports that came out over the weekend were that the Big Ten wanted to kind of delay until Tuesday or Wednesday's decision and see if all 5 conferences would move in unison in canceling the season, which, if that's true, again, another vote for no confidence in the Big Ten leadership. But what happens, we kind of mocked this report that we saw that came out about Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and Nebraska potentially playing in the Big 12 this season, just as a one-off type of situation, as programs that really seem to want to move forward with playing. Of course, this university president vote throws a lot of doubt into that. But again, it's, where the presidents are versus the athletic directors and so on. I mean, ultimately the buck stops with the president. But back to Dan Patrick's show. What if the SEC really is the last man standing at the end of this, and Ohio State were to be invited to play kind of a one-off schedule, as a a mix up of SEC and a couple of Big Ten teams. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else would go there. I mean, we're assuming Big 12 and ACC kind of do their own thing. We don't know. I mean, that certainly could be the biggest chicken salad out of a chicken crap situation.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really intriguing idea if those reports about the SEC actually looking to add teams to their conference, especially given how Ohio State has matched up with SEC teams in the past. These players aren't going to look to transfer into the SEC, as we talked about a few minutes ago, to play the season. If the SEC is going to add teams to their conference, they're going to have to act fast, I think so, to rework a schedule, to work in travel accommodations, work in practices, and all that preparation is going to have to come relatively quickly.
I mean, it certainly does create an interesting Hail Mary type of situation. Again, the hopes and the desires of the athletes and, the hopes and the desires of athletic administrators are one thing, but if university presidents aren't willing to move forward with it, I mean, it all kind of dies on the vine at that point. But, it is something that, is going to be fun to talk about here for a day before, the official Tuesday announcement comes out or whatnot, whatever we get out of that situation. And the reality of no football for a while goes on. I want to get into one more topic as well. I mean, I could probably go into 50 topics and, people will probably click off and be like, Noon's just bitching again. We don't need to hear that. We've seen that before. But this whole talk about spring football, a lot of people have gone round and round about, well, spring is still there. If I had my choice, no to fall, but yes to spring. What are your thoughts on spring football? I certainly have my thoughts. People who subscribe to Buckeye Grove or follow me on Twitter at Kevin_Noon have certainly seen mine, but I don't want to prejudice you with my thoughts, so I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll pile on.
Yeah, for sure. So you can look at spring football one of two ways, kind of like a glass half full where, some football is better than no football. And certainly there are going to be repercussions, and that's kind of like the glass half empty perspective. If I were one of those top players, I certainly would opt out of a spring season in order to prepare for the NFL draft, to reduce the amount of wear and tear on my body, playing in the spring and then getting right back after it in the summer, and then hopefully taking on a normal season in the fall of 2021. I think for me personally, and this is going to depend on player reaction if these reported news breaks as it's been reported. If players are up for a spring season, I'm certainly down for it also. I would be in support of watching, I would assume second stringers, third stringers, get that playing time, establish themselves, maybe some surprises come through with the Ohio State depth chart if a spring season were to happen. So I'm on the optimistic side. I'll take some football over no football.
You see, and I've always kind of been the some football's better than no football, but I'm about to torpedo your story here, your argument, because I think spring football is the dumbest idea in the world for a multitude of reasons. And this has nothing to do with, maybe the selfish reasons of Ohio State fans of that, hey, this might have been the best team that they put together in quite some time, and they're going to lose, guys like Justin Fields and Shaun Wade and so on are not going to sit around and the NFL is the NFL, and they're not going to move their draft or their combine or anything. So these top players are going to opt out. So that, that does that. But the reality is, let's take a bad situation and make it worse, because you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to say, we're going to play even a 10-game schedule. Let's say that they take the 10-game schedule from the fall and they move it to the spring. Not even a 12-game regular season schedule with non-conference and so on and so forth. Let's just take the 10. You're going to play a 10-game schedule, maybe a conference championship game, maybe up to two bowl games in terms of if you do a college football playoff, maybe just a bowl game. You're going to do anywhere from 10 to 11 to 13 games. A season that could be done in May, June. I mean, I don't know. Depends on when you started and how long the season goes. Tell these guys, all right, rest quick, and then turn around and get ready for another season. No, what you would end up having to do is play a 7-game season in spring of 2021, and then probably a 7-game season in fall of 2021. So you mess up 2 seasons by doing this. That's just stupid. How can you make the immediate situation worse by effing up next year? That's what it sounds like to me. It is an absolute black hole of intelligent thought and leadership to sit there and even propose that type of stupidity. It is ridiculous. It really, really makes me wonder what people are thinking. But then again, we've gotten to this point where there's been no foresight, no planning, and everybody loses. Everybody loses. There are no winners in this situation.
Right. Yeah. I see your point for sure. I agree with it for the most part. I do not want to see the 2021 season impacted at all. I want as much normalcy next year, if that's when, the Big Ten's going to play again, to be. We've kind of seen it with Major League Baseball a little bit. This season, the 2020 season, obviously with 60 games, nowhere close to normal. But hopefully the season next year doesn't get impacted from any kind of rescheduling or pushback of the postseason. So if there is a spring season, maybe if players and officials are adapted to, playing maybe an 8-game season or a 7-game season, anything to get in some type of games in the spring. I don't know if they want to go a full year without some sort of contest going on.
Well, and I even had somebody on social come up to me and say, well, what about, 4 games? Just kind of consider it, not necessarily, we're not crowning a champion or anything along those lines. 4 games, just to kind of be in conjunction with where you would do spring ball and everything. Maybe you recoup a little bit of the broadcast money. You get an opportunity to send some of these players off potentially the right way.
Right.
And I do like the idea because ultimately I feel worst for the kids. I feel really bad for me because it's gonna be pretty interesting trying to go through fall covering no football in the Big Ten, especially if other conferences are happening. But aside from my own petty concerns, I feel bad for these kids. And I see kids out there saying how bad they want to play. Honestly, you're going to send these kids back home because you're going to do distance learning or whatever. And even with that, there's a big disconnect there because a lot of schools still are going to bring kids on for in-person classwork, and you're not going to do football. But you're going to send these kids home to where they are not getting 3 square a day, to where they're not having structure in their lives. You're dooming a lot of these kids by putting them back into situations that by going to college, they're hoping to change their lot in life. And that doesn't even necessarily mean, that everybody's going to end up going pro. We know that it's a small percentage of players that end up going pro. But you put these kids, you get them out of some bad habits, some situations, maybe that one bad friend that they kind of need to get away from, maybe, putting structure in their lives, certainly, health and nutrition and whatnot. But no, the fear of liability and the fear that players are organizing, whether or not you want to call it a union or a players association or whatever, has really driven this. And those are my beliefs. I'm not stating that as fact, but I'm stating that as my firm beliefs in this situation. This is the Ed O'Bannon killing NC2A football game on super steroids times a million. We are never going to be able to unring this bell.
Oh yeah, for sure. Without any football going on and organized team activities like they've had with these protocols already in place to prevent the spread of this virus, sending them home with no incentive on Saturdays to play, it's really up in the air and up to everybody's imagination as to what the numbers are going to look like here come the fall in terms of, the virus and what it's going to look like early next year. So not having anything in place is really going to place a lot of responsibility on these people, and you can't really trust them to follow through with no incentives on the weekends now. So it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be interesting to watch for sure, to say the least.
And I kind of want to end on this one, yet another thing that I'm going to complain about. What does this mean? College football is a very small window in terms of, you get some players are there for 3, some are there for 4, some are there for 5. There's a very small window of guys due to bad luck along the way that get 6 years. But are we going to sit there and find a situation to where we are giving guys that extra year of eligibility back? Are they losing a year because of this? We saw in terms of spring sports that the NC2A did offer relief to people who had their seasons wiped out. But with that being said, not all it was up to schools to make that decision if they wanted to extend that or not. So, and I'm going to pick on one school where Wisconsin did not honor scholarships an extra year, whereas Ohio State did. And, we weren't talking about a ton of scholarships at that point. But it also creates a situation of where, you may have seniors who their future is not going to be playing in the NFL or whatever. Coming back for another year, getting a year of grad school or whatever would be great, but you're going to get over that 85 scholarship limit. Plus, what does this mean for recruiting when you sit there and you recruit for the natural churn that are college athletics? We are recruiting 3 guys at this position because we have 3 guys at this position leaving. So that, do recruiting classes get turned upside down? Do other programs use that against schools? If the Big Ten is the only conference, or the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are the only 2 conferences not to play this year, or let's say 4 of them, let's say only the SEC goes forward, hey, it's all well and good that you're looking at Ohio State, but God, look at the leadership that's going on in terms of that conference. They could shut you down at a moment's notice. They create so many other ripples that, this is really a dark day for my favorite sport. I will come down off of this anger high shortly after posting this podcast, and I'm sure I will fall into a deep funk over that. But this is a dark, dark day. And as I said just a couple minutes ago, there are no winners. There are no winners in this situation whatsoever. And, it's not necessarily a case of where somebody's trying to win or whatever. I think even the university presidents and conference commissioners who are having to make difficult decisions, recognize that. But I really think that this was a short-sighted CYA chicken crap decision.
I have to back that up for sure. My immediate reaction, it was a gut punch. There won't be fall athletics. So now it's time to get creative. I don't imagine these athletes are going to sit around, back at their apartments or their houses. They're going to put in some work and get ready for the next game, the next practice, whenever that may be. Now that the ball has been passed over, let's see what happens here.
Well, we're gonna leave it at that. We're closing in on the 30-minute mark. I certainly don't have anything else good to say. I'm sure there are plenty who will listen to this whole podcast and said, "Noon, you didn't have anything good to say for the whole show." But I want to thank Jacob for joining me on this impromptu show. We did kind of talk about the possibility last night, and everybody on staff wanted to get on and do this show. I think mostly just to hear how tightly wound I would be. Well, I hope I didn't let anybody down, because I certainly am pissed off. But I want to thank everybody for listening to the show. I want to thank Jacob, and once again, I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I have a feeling you're going to hear from me more this week. I have a feeling you might hear us on a daily schedule, as I have have more of an axe to grind. But we will go to that bridge when we get to it. For Jacob, I'm Kevin. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you very soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.